Okay, so that's how we can find these things and open them up and look at them. Now let's talk a little about reporting. Inspection counts and alerts we won't cover. We're not talking about inspections today, but we have an investigation counts preset report. So let me set, well, I'll just do, the current year. These reports generally default to whatever fiscal year you're in, so that's why it's July 1 through June 30. So this report shows all the different inspection types. Human effects ag, human effects antimicrobial, human effects structural, other, environmental, property loss damage, etc., all the way across. And then for each staff member in the county, it will show you the number of inspections that they have and then the totals. So all we have in here right now is Fred blogs. That's me doing the testing. But we have one human effects ag and one other, and so it's for a total of 2 that I have done and a total of 2 in the county because I'm the only one that's entering data in test. This report is only showing closed investigations. Okay, so it's a look back on investigations that have been closed within a certain window. The from and the to apply to the incident date, so it's not necessarily when these closed, which when we come to talk about how investigations are counted in PRAMR, there's some complexities as to how you can force an investigation to appear in a particular month for PRAMR purposes. Okay, a second report we have is pending investigations. This again gets back to that planning countdown. So this will show you, for incident dates that fall within this range, all of the open investigations and how old they are. So this is 18 days since the incident. This one, the incident is today. And it's just more like an accounts aging report. Show me my oldest investigations that are still open. Not that that necessarily matters, because investigations can take 6 months. It's not, but it's a useful thing to look at when you're looking at getting older investigations closed out. Then we have a more general report that's called activity counts. So a lot of what you might want to know is not just closed investigations, but what's everyone doing? What's their current workload? And so we have an activity counts report that shows for investigations how many currently are in progress, in review, and closed for incidents that fall within this date range for each staff member. So here Fred Blogs has 4 closed inspections, 2 in-progress investigations, 2 closed investigations, a closed compliance action, and so on. So this is kind of a combination of the overall record type. It's not by investigation type because then the screen would get way too wide. But for investigations, what are the statuses and how many do I have ongoing? So it's a little more detail on what everyone's up to in the county, and then.
The name of this report, which one is compliance? No. What's the name of this report? How do I get activity?
Yeah,
okay.
The activity counts.
Oh,
yeah, and it covers everything, all the different activities that somebody can be entering as far as inspections, investigations, and enforcement responses go. Then we have an interesting one, which is violation counts. So given a particular date range, give me the total number of violations by code section that have occurred on closed inspections and investigations. So for inspections, it's inspections that were performed between these dates, and for investigations with an incident date between those dates. But when you look at this in a real county, it gives you a real picture of the code sections that are most heavily in violation, and then it splits them up into which ones are awaiting enforcement, meaning they're on the dashboard somewhere and someone needs to begin an enforcement response for them. How many are in enforcement, and then how many have been disposed. So that's a neat report. Then we get to one that's a little, I think, more interesting, which is violations disposed. So for all of those violations that are associated with inspections and investigations between these dates, what was the disposal mechanism for them? So 6602, we had one violation, it was closed by a violation notice. We had two 6738s. One of them was closed. Actually, both of them are still open. And so you can see, how many were closed by fines, how many were closed by these other reasons, how many had to have a decision report, and how many were closed by a compliance action with no decision report required. If I go back and knock that date down, we should have some better test data. Yeah, so here's a little richer data set. So it provides an interesting snapshot on how your county is dealing with certain types of code sections. Now, it doesn't drill down at this point. Remember how I showed you how to divide a code section into subsections in an enforcement response? It doesn't subdivide it down into those sections yet. So it's not as detailed as it could be, but it's pretty close. And then the last thing to talk about is PRAMR. So obviously, investigations and enforcement responses make up a chunk of the PRAMR information. And let's have a look at PRAMR first. I'll go to the data entry component of it. Are you all familiar with the PRAMR report? Do any of you have a responsibility for compiling numbers for the PRAMR report?
That person is on vacation today.
Okay. So, within PRAMR, we have investigations, and it's, total licensed work hours. And then for enforcement responses, we get, where are the sections I'm looking for? I have a hard time reading this thing. No, sorry, I'm in the manual entry only section. Give me everything. It's a very long and horrible list. Inspections. And then we get down to our investigations. So all these different categories of investigation by type. And then beyond that, we get down to enforcement responses, number of compliance actions of each type, number of notices of violation, number of administrative actions, number of fines, all those different things. Now, as you can imagine, CalPEATS counts all these up for you if you have entered them into the system. So a big part of the reason for filling out all the details in the enforcement response module, other than disposing of your violations, is to have that information show up correctly in the PRAMR report. A lot of times you may go to one of these categories, investigations, why is it 3? I think it should be 4. So we also have a PRAMR details report, which I will pop open in a new tab so I can keep this screen up and available to us. So I'm just going to look at a particular month. I'll run this. And for things that we count up, like investigations, we have the total number that we claim that CalPEATS says is in that category. And then if you expand that, it will show you the actual record that is counting. And if there's more than one, it will show you each of them. And then, you can, it's easy, if I pop this one open, it's easy to see, oh, it's supposed to be in May. The hard thing is, if I think there should be 2 in May, I've got to go find where the other one is. So I can rerun this report for different months to see if I can find it, or I can export my list of all the investigations for like April through May, and then check off the ones that I see in this report and see what else is there. Okay, so when you get to the point where you're driving PRAMR from the data that's in CalPEATS for investigations and enforcement responses, this will become a useful report to you for tracking down when you think PRAMR has the wrong number. So that's really it in terms of reports that relate to the enforcement response and investigation world. But now that I've introduced that idea that it's important which month an investigation shows up in PRAMR, let's go look at one of the features on our investigations, which is the PRAMR month. So, where am I seeing it here? Oh, sorry, wrong place. For investigations, the instructions from DPR were pretty clear, and that is investigations count when they're closed. So what I wanted to show you on the investigations form is the activity log. I'd mentioned it in passing, and I'd said it's useful because it keeps track of status changes, so you have an automatic history. It's also useful if you want to keep your own notes in there as you're going through an investigation. On this date, I called so-and-so, and they left a voicemail, and they called me back on another date. But it's really important that each of the status changes is recorded in here. And when you close an investigation, it will create a record in here that says investigation status changed from in review to closed. And we're looking for the most recent event of that type to pick up the date for the PRAMR month. So if you want to know why a particular investigation shows up in May 2022, it's because the last time it was closed will be in May 2022. That has created an issue on a few occasions where somebody will notice a typo in an investigation, will open it, fix it, and close it again, and all of a sudden it moves to a different PRAMR month. If that happens, just let us know on the help desk and we'll fix the activity log for you so that it counts in the right month. But it's pretty rare, and anyway, that's just something to note. So when we talk about PRAMR and we talk about the PRAMR report that shows you which investigations counted for a month, that's what it's using. It's looking at the activity log and it's picking up the last entry that says the investigation was closed.
Show the override. We override that PRAMR.
That's on enforcement responses, isn't it?
It's the close the investigation, then it shows up.
Oh, is it when I close it?
Yeah.
Ah, right. Okay, so you'll see when I close the investigation, it says, here it is, May 2022. And if that's wrong, again, mostly because somebody opened it to fix something and closed it again, if you have the right privileges, which I'm sure my account does, there we go. Thank you. You thought he was just the cameraman, but he's actually the expert. You can change the month that it counts in using this PRAMR month dropdown if you have the associated permission. That's right. You used to have to call the help desk and we would fix the activity log. Now you can change it right here. So I can say I want this one to count in April, and then I can save that change and it will now count in PRAMR for April. Hopefully. Okay. With enforcement responses is a little more complex, particularly for NOPAs. So on most items in an enforcement response, all of the response actions that are compliance actions and referral actions and decision reports are the date that it goes into PRAMR is associated with the date the record is closed. So when you close a violation notice, that's the date that violation notice will show up in PRAMR. It's kind of, not too hard to figure out. With the NOPA, however, if you recall, there were a lot of statuses in NOPA. And again, county closed is the key status. When that county closed status is saved on the record, we save the PRAMR month. Again, if you have the right privileges, you can update the PRAMR month. Okay, so when you're looking at that PRAMR report and you're looking at your PRAMR and you think numbers are in the wrong months for investigations and enforcement responses, you have the ability, if you have the right permissions, to override that and get them moved into the month that you want them. Okay. Other than that, on PRAMR, The rest of it, I imagine you probably have already used to some extent because you're feeding information back from Acela into CalPEATS now to complete the PRAMR report. So have you all looked at the monthly review and multi-county review full, screens for PRAMR?
I've looked
No.
at them, but it's been a
I'll-
while.
I'll just give you a quick review and I don't have to go into too much detail. Other than the data entry, so there's going to be someone who's responsible for data entry and they'll compile all those numbers every month and enter them. We have a monthly review that is just for your county. So that just tells you your PRAMR numbers for all these different categories. And just remember when you're looking at the screen that by default we're only showing you manual entry. So if you want to review the whole PRAMR, you can hit all. And it will take a minute, particularly if you have a lot of data. For this, it's showing a year by default. If you have a lot of data, it can take 2 minutes, 3 minutes to generate the screen because it's calculating all this on the fly. If you go back to older closed fiscal years, it will be very fast because it doesn't have to recalculate everything. But these are all the PRAMR numbers for each month in the current fiscal year, all the way down. Now, that's super useful, but we also have a fiscal year review that will show you one fiscal year against another fiscal year. So if you're looking at your current 21-22 numbers and you want to know how different is it going to be from 2021, you know, we're into May now, so you're getting close. This will show you this fiscal year versus last fiscal year, or whatever range of fiscal years you want to pick, so you can see the trend in those numbers. And again, in order to get the screen to, you know, behave in a reasonable amount of time, we default to the manual entry only. But you can switch to the all or the mill levy only. Mill levy are the ones, the numbers out of the PRAMR that go into the mill disbursement calculation. All the others are relevant to your work plan, but are not part of the mill calculation. So you can look at the manual ones, which is, you know, making sure you've entered your numbers right. You can look at everything, which is how you're doing against your work plan, or you can look at the mill levy, which is your share of the mill going to be substantially different. And then the last one we have is a multi-county review. And again, remembering that everything in CalPEATS, once it's a closed record, is shared with everyone. So I can say, give me San Diego versus Imperial for FY 21-22. And hit refresh grid, and that will show me my numbers versus their numbers. Everyone was kind of, you know, freaked out by this in the beginning, but it's actually really useful to kind of see where you stand against other counties, and not so much the total amount of work, but different focus areas. Like, you know, what do the North counties focus on? Are they doing a lot of, you know, these inspections? Are they doing investigations? Are they doing a lot of surveillance hours? Kind of, you know, where do things stand? And of course, this includes inspections, but it's also the investigations, enforcement responses, and monthly, not monthly, the training and outreach sessions, and all the other components that go into PRAMR.